Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I am your host, Rick Jenkins, and I am so glad that you're with us, whether you are checking out our video on YouTube or maybe you have downloaded our podcast on Spotify or Apple or Google. However you are accessing the content, I am certainly glad that you are here. My next guest today is Bob Morgan. Bob is the CEO at the South Carolina State Chamber of Commerce. For those of you who don't know, the State Chamber promotes job and business policies at the state and the federal level, and they do a variety of things to help their members. And they basically are the leading voice of and business advocate for business executives and businesses throughout the state of South Carolina. Now, before Bob came down to South Carolina, he was in Charlotte, North Carolina for quite some time, about 13 years, I believe. He'll correct me here in a sec. And he was the CEO at the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. And my gosh, did Charlotte have a nice run while Bob was there. Make sure I get this right. During his 13 years there, they announced the relocation or expansion of close to 800 companies, 70,000 jobs, and $7 billion in new investment. And then Bob decided to bring his business acumen down here to South Carolina. Welcome, Bob.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me, Rick.
It is good to have you. Now, our studio is in Greenville, and you sit and reside in Columbia. Did you come all this way today just to hang out with me?
Just for you.
I feel privileged. I wish, though, that you had had another appointment or two, so I wouldn't feel like I'm taking up all your time. But regardless, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before we get into business, Bob, let's talk personal stuff. Tell me about yourself a little bit, where you're from, and give me the lowdown.
Spent most of my life in Charlotte. Grew up there. My family moved there when we were 6 years old. When I was 6 years old, and
where were you born?
I was born in Rome, New York, and there's an economic development angle to this story. So my father is from the Charlotte region. Out of high school, joined the Air Force, was stationed in upstate New York, where he met my mother. Started a family, got married, started a family. I was born in Rome, New York. The winter of 1971, we had 174 inches of snow.
Oh, my gosh.
And Dad said between that and the taxes and the labor unions, we're moving south. And he took a job with the Charlotte Police Department. I was 6 years old, and we were ahead of the future migration of families from the Northeast coming down to the Carolinas. In the late 70s, IBM moved about 1,000 families from upstate New York. Royal Insurance in 1984 moved their corporate headquarters from Lower Manhattan. So we relocated, and then we watched a whole lot of others. And during my time, I was on staff at the Charlotte Chamber for 11 years. I was CEO of the Gaston Chamber of Commerce across the river in Gastonia. And then for 13 years was the president and CEO of the Charlotte Chamber. During all of that time, saw tremendous growth and was able to be a part of it through the work of the Chamber.
Well, you certainly were. And if I remember right now, your wife is a Gamecock, and you went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Does that cause problems?
We've been married for 32 years.
You figured it out.
We've figured it out. That's right.
I hear you.
That's right.
Well, Bob, let's talk business. The State Chamber, I kind of want you to just kind of give me that elevator speech a little bit about the State Chamber of Commerce, but I want to set it up here for you for just a sec. You all are a leading advocate in South Carolina for things like tax reform, lawsuit reform, developing workforce initiatives, a variety of things that impact business in South Carolina in a variety of ways and that impact business executives. But kind of give me that elevator speech with that as a framework about why the Chamber exists.
Yep. Well, every town of virtually any size has a Chamber of Commerce.
That's right.
Most states have a Chamber of Commerce or something like it. We're all different. There's a saying in the business, if you've seen one chamber, you've seen one chamber. We are a 501c6 nonprofit membership-based organization, close to 800 members. We do not receive any public funding. We're not funded by the taxpayers. Companies voluntarily join through membership dues, through other activities, sponsorships, and whatnot, to help fund the work of the organization.
So you're most entirely funded on membership dues, and I guess you do events, you do a variety of things that bring in some ancillary sponsorship dollars, but we're talking membership here.
Correct.
Okay, please.
And again, purely voluntary. But companies who have an interest in state policy, companies who have an interest in doing business across the state and want to be connected with others in the business community are the types of companies that we typically attract. Now, the elevator speech, our vision is for South Carolina's economy to be the most vibrant in the United States, creating opportunity and prosperity for all. Our mission is simply to be the leading voice for business, and we do that in 4 different ways. We promote free enterprise, we convene the business community, we work with partners and allies, and we define and advocate for a pro-business agenda, the kinds of issues that you just mentioned, whether it's tax reform, whether it's tort reform, workforce development type issues, helping to define and then advocate for that business agenda. Now, if you want to break it down further, what do we do? If you look at what we do externally, of course, you have to raise the money, you have to count the money, you have to do the internal stuff. But if you look at what we do externally, about 2/3 of what we do is lobbying at the state house level. Yes, we take positions on federal issues, but primarily most of what we do is directed at the state house. 1/3 of what we do is to convene the business community. We do something that perhaps we can talk more about, a grassroots tour, August, September, October, where we go out to the local chambers of commerce to engage them in a dialogue around the policy issues affecting the business community. We have coming up our annual summit where we'll have a couple hundred leading business people from the state come together for 2.5 days to talk about the role that artificial intelligence is playing in the economy, to talk about the upcoming legislative session, to give some awards out. And so the convening of the business community is the other 1/3 of what we do.
So, if I'm trying to boil it down, it sounds to me like you travel the state, you talk to business folks, you find out what's important to them, and you take that to the legislature and try to impact some form of change.
That's right.
If I'm boiling it down, right?
You're boiling it down. And let me tell you what we don't do. We don't recruit companies to the state. And that's a very common misconception about state chambers of commerce.
I would have assumed you played a part, but
we don't have a formal role. The South Carolina Department of Commerce, working with regional and local developers, they're the ones who are out selling South Carolina and trying to land the projects and bring them in. We're asking commerce, and we're asking businesses that are already here all the time, what are those policies that you need to either be even more successful, or what are the policies that might be holding you back? Right. And we then go work on those. But we get credit all the time. I wish I had a nickel for every person who's congratulated me on bringing Volkswagen and Scout to Blythewood. And I guess after a few times of denying it, you just take the facts and move on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
But it is important to note that we're strong partners to the Department of Commerce and to the other developers, but that's not part of our role.
I got it. That's something you don't do, and I would guess another thing that you don't do or try not to do is step on the toes of local chambers of commerce that are throughout the state. But I would guess that sometimes you run into each other a little bit, but maybe I'm wrong. Tell me how those relationships exist.
Well, it starts for me as I'm a local chamber guy first. I spent a long time, many years, almost 30 years with the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. Interestingly, through professional associations, there's something called the Carolinas Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives that before I ever got this job, I knew a lot of the execs here in South Carolina. We would find ourselves at meetings together, both within the Carolinas, but also at the national level. So I came into the job 2.5 years ago with a familiarity of a lot of the chambers that are here, have proactively reached out to them to say, hey, we're partners. Most of them are members of our chamber. They're not subsidiaries of us. We're not a subsidiary of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We're a member of the U.S. Chamber, but we work closely. We convene the local chamber executives 4 times a year for formal meetings. We've grown from 1 representative of the local chambers on our board of directors. There are now 6. We continue to do the grassroots tour. Again, we visited 41 different local chambers, August, September, and October, to engage them in this discussion around the upcoming legislative session. And so we treat them like the valuable partners that they are. And here's part of the reason why. First of all, it's the right thing to do, but also talk to any legislator. And while we have a great lobbying team that spends a lot of time in the State House, they're very credible, they do a really good job, any legislator will tell you that on a particular issue, to hear from 3 or 4 of their business people back home, the Main Street businesses back home, that's much more powerful than any statewide organization that's trying to lobby for something. And so for us, when we're working on issues that we share in common, and I guess we might disagree on some issues occasionally, it doesn't happen very often, but for us to be able to call a local chamber and say, hey, we need you to contact Senator X or Representative Y on behalf of a particular issue, that's a very valuable way to be an advocate for what we're supporting.
Right. And, just so people know, you're working with people at the local level like Carlos Phillips here at the Greenville Chamber, Alan Smith in Spartanburg, Pam Christopher in Anderson, those kinds of folks. And I know I've left out folks, okay? I'm sorry I can't say them all. But you have good relationships with those people. Tell me which chambers member presidents are on your board, if you can recall that.
So Carlos from Greenville, Carl Blackstone from Columbia, Brian Dareberry from Charleston, Rita Berry from Somerville, Dean Fale from York County, and Murphy Monk from Hartsville.
Good job.
You tried to get me in trouble there.
Excellent. I was sitting there wondering if you get all six. Good job. Good job. All right, let's switch gears and let's talk about workforce. Workforce is a challenge. Mm-hmm. And workforce has been a challenge for us in South Carolina. It's not only South Carolina, of course, folks, but it has been a challenge for us for quite some time now, especially considering advanced manufacturing types of jobs that we constantly need, and it's hard to keep them filled. I know that you all do a lot of work with, spend a lot of time and effort with workforce challenges. Tell me how the State Chamber inserts itself into that conversation and how it impacts the end result.
Well, where we start is by listening to our members, right? And I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record now because the grassroots tour is our mechanism for doing that. Workforce has been and remains the number one challenge facing companies in South Carolina. We have maybe 100,000 jobs that are going unfilled. Just imagine the economic impact that could be generated if we could fill those jobs. And so if you look back to the legislative session earlier this year, if it had any theme to it at all, it was workforce, led by all of the leadership, frankly, especially the Speaker of the House, Merle Smith, passing a bill that now consolidates the state resources around workforce, gives the Department of Employment and Workforce kind of an umbrella role to help deliver and market those resources to businesses. One of the things we find South Carolina, in a variety of ways, through the technical college system, through the Department of Commerce, through DO, offers a lot of resources to companies. A lot of companies aren't aware of what those resources are. So hopefully with this streamlining, we'll be more effective at that. The other thing is we look at the labor force participation rate. South Carolina has a lower than average labor force participation rate, which is right about 57% versus a national average of 62 or 63%.
Explain that to me.
These are able-bodied of working age folks who are not employed and not in the workforce. And so at a time when unemployment is 3.2%, we're at full employment in particular. So a lot of conversation around how do we get that labor force participation rate up. Part of the answer there may be some folks who are in the gig economy who we're not able to count in the traditional ways. Somebody might be living in South Carolina, they may be working remotely for a company in New York, and we may not be counting it. That could be one of the issues. But we run into more traditional barriers to employment, something we've heard loud and clear this year, in addition to wages, in addition to lack of transportation, perhaps, lack of affordable housing. Child care seems to be of growing interest. It's not just that child care can be expensive. In some cases, it may cost more to put children into child care than one is going to make in a particular job. That becomes a no-brainer of a decision. There's not enough of it. And then the child care industry faces the same worker shortage that every other industry is facing. We learned of an example down in Hilton Head of a facility that has capacity for 100 additional children. They don't have the teachers that they can hire to come in, and so those slots are going unfilled. So one of the things we expect to hear, we know, don't expect, but there's already been a joint task force set up by the House and the Senate to look at child care. One of the things they'll be looking at, there's currently a tax credit for companies who provide child care for their stipends for their employees. exactly 20 companies in the state of South Carolina use that tax credit. Something's wrong with that tax credit. It needs to be tweaked. It needs to be better marketed. And it's not just South Carolina. We're seeing states across the country who are trying to figure this one out.
Now, the legislature, they go into session in January, is that correct?
Right.
Early January, I think, and it lasts, 5 months, 4 months, off and on.
That's right.
I would assume that this is going to be one of the main things you all will be talking about.
Absolutely. And, the broader issue of workforce, South Carolina is a very pro-economic development state. Last year, largest capital investment announced in the history of the state at $10 billion. What's the number of jobs? 14,000 new jobs that go with that. We want to remain very competitive in bringing companies like Volkswagen and Scout and the battery manufacturers and the lithium producers that were part of that. But if you don't have the workers, at some point, these companies can't come in and grow, and your existing employers can't fill the jobs that they have. So workforce is going to be with us for some time. It is somewhat of a global issue. There was a book 20 years ago, The Coming Jobs War, that talked about the global competition for talent. I like to look at the subject from very broadly. What do we need to do to meet the challenge? We need to better prepare the organic talent that's already here. Get that labor force participation rate up, get K through 12 improved, fund and work with our technical college system and our institutions of higher learning to prepare people for the jobs of today and tomorrow. We need to keep South Carolina attractive. We're a fast-growing state. People are moving here. I like to say we don't want to just get our fair share of the migration of folks from the Northeast and the Midwest to the Southeast. We want to get more than our fair share. What are we doing to keep our state attractive to bring that talent here versus it going to North Carolina or Georgia or Tennessee? And then third, and this isn't the most popular thing, but as a country, we need immigration reform. Yes, we need to protect our borders, but we also need to figure out the people that would like to come here to help fill the jobs that those of us who are here are not filling. We need to figure out a way to reform the immigration system, to bring more talent here, to help us fill the jobs that we have and to continue to grow the economy and prosper.
That is quite the controversial topic, as you alluded to. Another topic that is somewhat controversial as well is the fact that there is a push amongst some to change some laws to where felons that get out of prison would more easily be able to find work. Do you all have anything to do with that?
Oh, we've supported that for nonviolent offenders.
Nonviolent.
Making it easier for them to enter the workforce because they face all kinds of barriers. Yeah. And there are some companies who would rather not go there, and that's their right. There are other companies that see that as a potential source of labor and of talent. And so, and that too is a national trend that we've seen across the country. Eliminate check the box. And find ways to make it easier for, again, nonviolent offenders to find their way into the workforce.
You mentioned the technical college system here a little bit ago, Tim Hardy and all of those tech college presidents like Keith Miller here in Greenville as an example. There is not an organization that is probably more helpful to advanced manufacturers in South Carolina than the tech college system itself. I know that there's constant meetings with those folks to see what the tech college system can do to help within this workforce challenge. Do you all work with the tech colleges, and if so, how?
We work with them very closely. And I will share with you another personal note. My mentor at the Charlotte Chamber, the guy that hired me, is a South Carolinian, Mr. Carroll Gray, who's former CEO of the Greenville Chamber of Commerce before he went to Charlotte in 1984. He's from Gray Court here in the upstate, of course. I heard for years, working under Carroll's tutelage, how North Carolina thought it had the best community college system in the country, but that South Carolina's technical college system was far superior as an economic development tool, producing the talent to meet the needs of the employers in the economy today and the ones we want to bring here tomorrow. So I came into the role with an appreciation for the technical college system, thanks to Carroll. We work very closely together in multiple ways, most notably funding requests, helping to support them through the budget process in the last couple of years, the workforce scholarships that basically provide free technical college tuition for anybody who's going into one of the fields that's in demand in our economy. We've supported that in public ways, testifying in the State House, writing letters, resolutions, whatnot. We have a couple of the technical college system presidents on our board of directors, so they're at the table as we convene the business community around workforce and other issues. We actually have some conversations going about trying to get out of the box and find some ways that we can partner together, perhaps bring some resources from the private sector that the technical college doesn't already have, to try to get at the challenge of that labor force participation rate. We're in the very early stages of brainstorming, but on my way here today, I had a note from Dr. Hardy's office. We're trying to get that meeting scheduled. So we appreciate the role that they play, and we welcome opportunities to be supportive and to partner with them.
Let's talk about the grassroots effort that you were talking about a little earlier with grassroots tour. Is that what you call it? And you said you went to, do I remember right, 41 cities over the course of a period of time?
Yeah, we had 26 stops, and there were 41 chambers in those stops. Our chambers went in together.
I got you. So what does that look like? You roll into a town, and what happens?
Yeah, so it may be a meeting of their board of directors. It may be a legislative committee. It may be a larger meeting of the membership. The size varies of each meeting. But we use a tool called Mentimeter. Mentimeter, we invite the audience to pull out their phones, their cell phones. They snap a QR code. The presentation shows up on their phone. It's also up on a screen. And as we go through the screen, we share information, data points, and then we ask questions. How do you feel about the U.S. economy? How do you feel about South Carolina's economy? What's the number one issue that's holding your business back? And we go through a series of questions around broad topics, and we see the results in real time as they vote. We then aggregate that data over, we had 897 participants this year, and we get calls from leadership in the State House. What are you hearing? And we will publish the results, and we will proactively share it with legislators, with policymakers at the state level, with business people, and just let them know what we're hearing from the business community.
Bob, I'm going to get you out of here on this. As we alluded to earlier, legislative session begins in early January, and we talked about a couple things that might be on the ticket for discussion then, including workforce issues. Is there anything else that might be coming out of that legislative session that business executives who are watching or listening would be interested?
Well, an issue that can be a bit obscure to the general public, but tort reform or lawsuit reform is an issue that's very important to the business community. And it's of broad interest in that South Carolina has a system where those companies and even individuals with the deepest pockets in lawsuits can be unfairly targeted to be held 100% liable, even though they may not be, but something much less responsible for whatever the
people go after the ones with the most money.
Correct. And so that's very costly to business. It's very costly to all of us who pay for insurance. We pay more in insurance here than most of the other states around us. There's a particular area of focus, in addition to the broader, let's talk about the whole business community. Insurance for those who serve and sell alcohol. Talk to restaurateurs and bar owners and people that operate venues, and their insurance costs are going up. I've heard as high as 400% and 500%, and sometimes they still can't find companies willing to underwrite that liability. And so we have already seen a few bars and restaurants to close. We're likely to see others. There does seem to be a good focus on let's address that so that the insurance for them can be more affordable. We are all for that. We would also like to see the attempt made to address the broader subject of joint and several liability as well. There's a bill that's in a Senate committee that we think we have the votes, if we can get it to the floor, to get it through the Senate. We're encouraged that the House might be able to pass it, but there'll be strong opposition to it from the tri-lawyer lobby, and that's what we'll be up against.
Bob, great stuff, man. I appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you having me.
Folks, that is Bob Morgan. He is the president and the CEO at the South Carolina State Chamber of Commerce. Appreciate you joining us for another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. We'll see you next time.